This is the second section of a two-part tutorial on 3D Budget's budget reconciliation process. If you have not already done so, please click the accompanying link to view Part 1 first and then return to this video afterward. In the first section, we covered what reconciliation is, why it is important, and the details of the reconciliation calculation. Now we will walk through the steps in the reconciliation process in 3D Budget and then end the video with a discussion of how often reconciliation should be performed. Let's continue. Here is the main 3D Budget screen. Click the Reconcile button on the left to start the reconciliation process. The first step is to enter the amount of cash you have in your wallet. This should include any cash that is not in bank accounts. For this demonstration, let's assume we have $100 of cash. The second step is to enter any early or late income. This entry can be confusing, so be sure to use the wizard for help. The wizard shows that there are two income sources with automatic allocation: a monthly income of $5,000 and a weekly income of $300. It also shows the current period that is being evaluated for each. You should enter here any income that is early for current or future periods and any income that is late for previous periods. For example, if you have already received your main income for April, or if you have not yet received your main income for March, you should enter it in the appropriate field. However, if you have received March's income and April's income is still to be received at the end of April, which is in the future, you don't need to enter anything. For this demonstration, let's assume that our second income for the week ending on April 17th, last week, is late. We would enter $300 in the late field. Then click Select Total to transfer this value to the reconciliation input screen. The main reconciliation screen shows a summary of the changes to free assets since the last saved reconciliation. As you recall from the earlier discussion on the reconciliation calculation, there are three reasons for a change to free assets: missed expenses, unbudgeted expenses, and unbudgeted income. In this screen, each of the calculated fields has a button labeled Details. You can use these buttons to understand how each value was calculated. For example, clicking on the unbudgeted expenses details will display a list of all unbudgeted expenses. Or, clicking on the free assets details will display the free assets calculation we reviewed earlier. Next, note the blue numbers 1 to 4 that are listed on the left. These are the recommended steps in the reconciliation process. You can also click the Instructions button for an explanation of these steps. You should complete these steps in this order each time you do a reconciliation. The first step is to correct missed cash expenses. 3D Budget calculated that $40 of cash expenses were overlooked. We can click right on the number 1 to see your options for correcting these missed expenses. There are several options available for making this correction, depending on what you know about the missed expenses. The first option is the easiest because it doesn't require any knowledge of which transactions were missed. Click number 1 to adjust expenses generically in the Budget Manager. This opens the Budget Manager, where you should enter a total of $40 of expense adjustments. We will assign them to the food category. Save these adjustments, then return to the reconciliation screen. And click Refresh. You will see that missed cash expenses is now 0. The second step is to check new unbudgeted expenses. 3D Budget shows that we entered $60 of expenses and did not assign them to any budget category. If we want to reduce free assets permanently by $60, then we don't need to make any changes. However, if we want to keep the same free assets as before, we should fix these expenses. Clicking directly on the number 2 will display the options for fixing them. We can either correct the entries we made, or we can make a counterbalancing unbudgeted income entry. The simplest approach is to correct the existing entries. Click number 1 to open a list of all expense transactions that were not budgeted, and change them to assign them to a normal budget categories. Double-clicking on the transactions opens the Change Transaction window, where we can correct the category. When you return to the reconciliation screen, click Refresh, and you will see that new unbudgeted expenses now shows 0. The third step is to check new unbudgeted income. 3D Budget shows that since the last reconciliation, we have received $800 of income that is not part of the budget assumptions. If we want to increase free assets by $800, then we don't need to make any changes. However, if we want to keep the same level of free assets as before, we should allocate this income to the budget. This is done by clicking directly on the number 3 and clicking the link to go to the Budget Manager. In the Budget Manager, we should enter $800 of manual allotments. Note that unbudgeted income at the bottom of the screen increases by $800. This means that we now have $800 more available for spending. We could immediately add this to our budget availabilities, or we could do it later. Let's add it to the savings category right now. When you return to the reconciliation screen, click Refresh and you will see that new unbudgeted income now shows 0. Also note that free assets now equals the previous free assets from the last reconciliation. The fourth step is to adjust free assets if desired. This is only necessary if you want to change your permanent free assets level. In other words, if you feel that you are keeping free assets too low or too high, you would make an adjustment now. To make that adjustment, click directly on the number 4 to see options. The options are similar to the options for fixing unbudgeted income and expenses. For this demonstration, assume we want to increase free assets by $100. Clicking on option number 1 takes us to the Income Management screen. We should enter a manual income allotment of negative $100 to reduce the income we have assigned for budgeting. Note that unbudgeted income at the bottom of the screen also decreases by $100, meaning that we would need to reduce our expense budget by $100. After saving this and returning to the reconciliation screen, click Refresh and you will see that free assets is now $100 higher than last time. Sometimes, if you want to increase free assets but your finances don't allow it, it is necessary to do several small adjustments over a period of time, such as $100 increases each month. The last step in the reconciliation process is to save the reconciliation. This saves all of the amounts from this reconciliation for reference in the future. Now, if you reopen the reconciliation screen, we will see that the last free asset calculation shows $1,200 instead of $1,100. You can also click Last Free Assets History to see the data from all previous reconciliations. This can be used to analyze what free assets level is best for you. When reconciliation is complete and you have a safe level of free assets, and when your checking and credit accounts are balanced, you can feel comfortable that your budget is balanced with your funds. You should be able to pay your bills freely without worrying too much about the timing of payments, and you should always be able to pay off your credit cards without incurring any finance charges. It will always be easy to see how much money you have to send to your long-term investments, and you will be able to analyze your spending habits in a 100% comprehensive way. So the final question is, how often should you do a reconciliation? This depends on your individual situation. It depends on how accurate your record keeping is, especially for cash transactions. If you tend to miss a lot of transactions, then you should reconcile more frequently. It depends on how much you use cash. The more you use cash, the more chances of missing transactions, and the more frequently you should reconcile. It depends on how stable your income is and how closely you are cutting your assumed income to your real income. For example, if you receive $1,000 per month and allocate $999 per month, you will need to reconcile more often than if you allocated a safer level of $800 per month. And it depends on your own level of risk aversion. If you want to avoid risk at all costs, you should reconcile more frequently. The standard recommendation is to reconcile monthly or quarterly. Generally, if you reconcile once every 1 to 3 months, you will be safe. You should start out more frequently, monthly, and slowly decrease the frequency as you learn what level of free assets is best for you, and as you feel more comfortable with 3D Budget. Most importantly, make sure that you are reconciling on some frequency. Only 3D Budget gives you this capability. Are you ready to take control of your finances? If you haven't already done so, go to www.3dbudget.com to download 3D Budget for a free 30-day trial.